In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about the Cambridge First use of English, and we'll take a look at the Part 1 exercise. So here's some basic information about this exercise. It is a text with 8 gaps in it. There are multiple choice answers, and for each of these answers, there are 4 possible options for each question. We move on now just to show you what you can find in the exam, and these are the type of instructions you can find in the paper-based exam, where it tells you you have 8 questions and that there's an example at the beginning, and we can see our example there. And this is the beginning of that text with the example. If you're doing the computer-based exam, the instructions are very similar. Again, it tells you you have 8 questions. And there's our text, but what you need to do here, as it says in the instructions, you need to click on a gap. And we have 2 examples here. We've got 1 and 2. So if we click on number 1, we can see that these are our multiple choice options for question 1. And for question 2, the same thing. These are the options for question 2. And you just click on whichever answer you think is best. So let's just talk a little bit about how you can find the answers for this. And to use the answer here is a report. So let's just think about it, and let's just go and check why this answer is correct. One thing about doing the Part 1 exercise is that there are 3 things to consider. The first thing to consider for each of the gaps is the grammar correct? You also need to ask yourself, is the meaning of the word right for this particular gap? And the third question is about the collocation, and is the collocation of this word correct for the gap? And if we just look at each one of these, if we want to use the word describe, we need to say to describe something, and that's not possible in this sentence. And with inform and tell, you need to use someone or a person. So our correct answer clearly here is report. Now let's look at our completed example, and here we have 2 gaps, and these are our 2 options for number 1 and number 2. So let's just review each of these words and decide what the best word is in each case. So for question 1, A is not possible because we need to have accepted as in the sentence. B is the same, where we would say regarded as, so this is not possible. The third word, assessed, means to make a judgment, and this doesn't really have the correct meaning in this case. So the final answer here, D, is the correct one, and the grammar for that is believed to be, and that's perfect for this gap. If we look at question 2, and in this case, the first word is the correct word because to stuff something means to fill something. So this is perfect for this gap. Looking at the other words, load means to add weight, so the meaning here is not correct. In our third example, the grammar is not correct if we try to use pushed. And the meaning is different in D, where block means to stop or prevent something. If we move on to the next 2 examples, 3 and 4, and these are the options for these. So let's examine each of these possible options. So in question 3, the collocation for A is not correct. We don't use say for true. We also have the same problem with B. Say for specific is not a collocation in English. And C has the same problem. Say for true is not a collocation. And D is a correct answer because the collocation is say for certain. If we look at question 4, A is a word that we use when we talk about some type of education. And B, the meaning is also different for what we want to say here, and commonly the word force has a military type of idea. The correct answer here is the word team, and we use team to talk about organized groups, and in this case, a research team. And D is also incorrect because the word company, we generally use it to talk about some form of business. If we look now at the gaps for 5 and 6, and these are the possible options. So let's look at each one of these and decide which is the best answer. And with question 5, we can see that we need some form of the phrasal verb, and turn over is one example, but it's not correct because it means to change position. To turn into means to change. And turn up is the correct answer because in this context here it means to appear. And then finally the fourth option, D, turnabout, means to change direction. We look now at number 6. And in this case, our first option is the correct one. And the grammar we use is as recently as. And for the other options, for B, as lately as is not an option. As presently as is also not an option. And the same with D, as immediately as. These are not possibilities. And now we come to the last two gaps in the text, and these are the options here. And again, we'll take a look at these and decide which one of these is the best answer. So for A, the meaning is not correct. There's no information there to talk about something, whether something is correct or not. And B, the word exactly is similar in meaning to correctly. And C is the same. The word precisely is quite similar to correctly. So the only word we can use in this case is obviously, which has the meaning of clearly. And our last question here, number 8. And our first example, held is not correct. We don't say held popular. The grammar is also not correct for stood. And C is the correct answer because the collocation is remain popular. And for our last option here, we can't use lasted. So how can you prepare for the Part 1 exam? Well, there are a number of things that you can look at and study. The first of these is collocations. Collocations are very important in English. And again, just to remind you, these are words that go together. For example, make sure, make a plan, or make sense. You also need to learn phrasal verbs. And these are examples of some of the most common verbs that are used with phrasal verbs. Go, come, keep, look, make, put, and take. You also need to think about prepositions and how we use them with other words. For example, interested in, agree with, good at. It is important to be familiar with a lot of these types of prepositions so you can recognize them in sentences. And then finally, there is the question of words that have similar meanings. And it is important to learn the differences. And we have an example here of 4 words which are quite similar to each other, but at the same time, we use them in different ways and they do have slightly different meanings.